Hello, my fellow apocalypse survivors. I hope you're all doing well. Forgive me for looking like trash. My hair is just not cooperating today, and my cat scratched me in the eye. And yes, I am recording this from my closet in my bedroom because it's the quietest freaking place in my entire apartment. So, Tartuffe. One of my favorite works, honestly. Um, I find it so enjoyable. I've read prose versions of it, but I always go jet set to the versions that are still maintained in couplets. Um, just because it's more enjoyable and it's so Dr. Seuss esque. I'm going to be focusing in on the last two parts of the article specifically, but I'm also going to touch a little bit on everything that's been said in the article and some broader thematic elements of it. Um, so just to jump in, let's not bullshit around. So my first question that I'm going to pose is: do you think that Doreen and Tartuffe are actually foils to each other? It's something I hadn't really thought about and never really entertained. Because in the end, like they do a minor bit of interaction, and usually in literature we see foils interacting more, so it exemplifies it more. Um, so like, do you view them as like those polar opposites of like light and dark, good and evil, kind of whatever? That's my first question. Just solely because they're both such fascinating characters, honestly. Um, Another question I want to ask in the broader sense is: what are your opinions of the show's language? I am unfortunate in the fact that like I might not have read the same version as everyone in the class. Um, but like I said before, the versions I prefer are always the ones that are very poetic and very positioned in that way. Where it's those rhyming couplet duos, and I found them just like it's so fun to read. And apparently, backstory. I'm gonna bring in a lot of my history of the show that when we did it here, but I always would have thought that would have made it like very easy for them to memorize things, but apparently it didn't. It made it a lot harder. Um, but did the language for you like make it difficult to understand what was going on, the action? Because not everyone's had the opportunity to see it staged, and so I'm very, very curious as to whether reading it is different than having seen it. Like at the end of the day, one thing that the chair of the Department of Theater and Dance likes to say is that theater is never meant to be read; it's always meant to be seen. God, my hair looks awful. But theater is always meant to be performed and seen and viewed. So, did was there any part of this that like confused you or hung you up in your process of assimilating the literature? Um, so yeah. Um, Going off that in relation to having seen this produced, one thing overarching from the article on every section that I wanted to touch on was the fact that they commented that Doreen was a very asexual character, and it was something fascinating to me. Just because I had never viewed Doreen that way. I kind of view Doreen as kind of like that sassy kind of person who's like, well, you can fire me at any time. I don't care. Um, I never viewed it as a sexual or non sexual aspect. Um, Having seen it done here, we we had decked out Doreen in a way that was provocative yet tasteful. Like we exemplified the parts of the actress who played her actor. Sorry, Helen Housley. Helen Housley would not appreciate me saying actress. Um, But we had exemplified, the physical attributes of the actor playing Doreen without making it tasteless or tacky. Um, and that's why it was a very big shock for me to read that Doreen is an asexual character, because I'm like, at the end of the day, Doreen was just like a fierce commodity. And that might go along with the ideals of the time period where women were sexless without the instrument of a male. Um, but at the same time, I don't think that makes her any less appealing as a character than Elmire or Marianne. So I don't know. Like, I mean, I would be curious to see your thoughts on that. So moving on to my next question, because I have a series. Please be patient. I see you. Um, is Tartuffe, like, he is the antagonist, but is he a true antagonist? Um, and is he at all redeemable? Is there any redeeming quality in Tartuffe? Because my big thing without, like, every good story has an antagonist. There's always someone who works against something that someone else wants. But Tartuffe himself, yes, he is a deviant in a lot of ways, and he is a false individual. But does he not exist to bring out the facets of the human condition that exist in every one of the other characters that are not being actualized? And if you solely exist to um kind of like actualize and personify other people's flaws and desires and hangups, um like, are you really an antagonist because you just literally brought out what was there? So, food for thought. Um, Another thing I was thinking when reading my portion of the article was, if we view it in a modern sense, because granted these are older plays, they have to be viewed to a certain regard, um, through the lens of their own temporal and historical accuracy. Yes, the societal norms that dictated them then are very different than they are now. However, if we viewed it through a modern sense, would you say that Tartuffe represents A, the patriarchy, which I personally think he does, but does he represent, in a colloquial modern sense, toxic masculinity? Um, like, that, like, the worst guy, kind of like he's just out to get women, he'll lie and do whatever he can to get what he wants, kind of a thing. It's, I don't know, like, it was just a fun thought when I was reading it, that I was like, I have to say something about this. um Also, as an overarching thing for the show itself, viewing where it came from in a stance in history, would you say that this show is ahead of its time? And my big thing with this is, like, it just seems very progressive. And, like, the fact that it had to be rewritten to make it tamed down and more appeasing to the general public, as well as the overarching dominant power in a society. Like, it just kind of seems like something that would be written now. Like, I could see this as a TV show or a movie, um, with some of our most famous and significant pop culture artists. Um, so yeah. Um, Couple of my last questions. I'm trying to keep this brief just so I don't yammer on, because I don't know how to do this, because coronavirus has destroyed any type of learning environment. Sorry to my professors and sorry to my fellow students that things suck. Like, I'm a senior. Like, what a way to send off the semester. Um, However, going forward and trying to be productively academic, um, by my last arguments, um, is Doreen the voice of modern reason? Like, does she represent what position we are at now? Like, if the play is not ahead of its time, is the character of Doreen? Because Doreen has sound advice that goes against the societal norms of the time period and the culture. And they seem very, very systematically consistent with what we are currently talking about as a culture, as Americans, as Western individuals. Um, so, does she represent the modern reason? Or, my other thought was, is Doreen the audience? Is Doreen the if the show is not ahead of its time, if it's not progressive, does Doreen represent that kind of sense of societal outrage, or does she represent what back then would have been kind of bucking against the gun? Like, does that make sense? Um, Also, I would love as a side comment to ask if we had to like modernly interpret this show, like how would you do it? Like when we did it here, it was a huge thing because we had a raked stage, and I don't know if we've gone over this or not. I forget. I've been so sick this semester. But a rake stage is when like instead of flat, it's like kind of inclined. We did it with a rake stage, and it was set period. However, we used modern fabrics. So like Tartuffe wore Crocs. Hated it personally. However, it was a cool touch. Like, bring it up to speed. And like the fabrics were modern fabrics, and like they were gossamer and like knitted and shit like that. Sorry, I shouldn't swear so much in this presentation. Um, but they were modern fabrics. However, they were done to a period style, which was really cute, especially for the female characters, because I'm like, you look like a princess, like amazing. Um, but I'm curious, like, could we bring this into a modern age in any aspect? Um, so yeah, that's kind of my spiel, as my folks say. Um, I hope I touched on a lot some of the topics that was discussed in the latter half of the video, or the article. Um, I didn't want to quote a lot at you just because I don't see the point, because we all should have read it at the end of the day. Like, it wasn't that hard to read, it was 17 pages. So I'm not. I wasn't. I had no intention of throwing quotes at you. Um, but at the same time, I'm very curious to see everyone's thoughts on this show as a whole, but also like on this section. Like, it's one of my favorite shows. So let me know how it goes, and if we do not interact at all for the rest of the time period, if I don't comment on your stuff or etc. I hope you guys have a great rest of your semester. I hope your classes are going well, even though they're remote. Um, Huge shout out to my professors who are being G's and being lenient and doing their best to try to keep the system together. And let's all survive Corona.